o'clock. So let's call the Planning Commission work session number 32 to order. Heather, would you call the roll?
Mr. Tarley?
Here.
Mr. Klee?
Here.
Mr. Boswell?
Here.
Ms. Macbeth?
Here.
Mr. Schaller?
Here.
Mr. Granger?
Here.
Mr. Sokolowski?
Here.
Okay, Carolyn.
Yes. So we'll start out with chapter 8, and basically what I'm going to do is just give you a highlight of what I changed in those chapters, and then we can have a general discussion if that's okay with everyone as to any specific other pages you want to talk about. So in chapter 8, this was the chapter we reviewed with EDA at our last work session earlier this month. So on page 8.1, I added that section highlighted in red based on discussion at that meeting about talking about the residential uses on commercial properties, and it stressed that mixed use is preferred, that we really didn't want to go entirely to residential on commercial properties if possible. So this is the section I added to that paragraph to sort of highlight that area. Is everyone okay, I think, with that wording, or is there something you want to add more?
I think it's fine. I had a couple of editorial comments that I can just send you the PDF. I just marked it up with just there was a little bit of repetition, that's all.
That'll be fine. And then on page 8-16, we had a discussion on the visitor center. So I noted in this chapter that the specific visitor center information was in chapter 9, I believe, I'm trying to get the 8-16. Yes, for information on the visitor center redevelopment, see chapter 9, Colonial, Williamsburg, and William and Mary. So I added that into this chapter for the Northeast Triangle because that was part of the discussion we had. And then on page 8-19, this is the area we really need to discuss because EDA was saying that the developer wanted to have an additional entrance onto Route 199. And I think, Elaine, you mentioned some concern with that also, and staff has some concern with that as far as let alone the entrance on 199 being a James City County and VDOT approval required. The amount of clearing association that would be needed for that new entrance was a concern I think you raised also, Elaine. So I think this is something we probably do need to discuss and get the commission's feeling as to whether you want what I wrote in here to be what the commission wants, or if you want to discuss it and change this some more. What I basically have in here is the developer would like an additional entrance from Route 199 into the development, which requires approval from James City County and VDOT, since Route 199 is a limited access road not located in the city. I talked to the development manager at James City County. He agreed that it was probably unlikely that VDOT and the county would want another entrance into the development. He also had the same concerns with creating another swath of the buffer area being removed if it was approved. So that's my comment on that. And I guess it's good. There were members who weren't at the EDA meeting, so we probably need to have a little discussion on this aspect of it. I think basically Route 199 is, like I said, a limited access road. When you do even right-ins and right-outs, and especially in the middle between two major roads, it slows down the traffic, and that's a major concern. It's not like, Richmond Road or some other highway in the city or in the county. This is designed to move traffic, to keep traffic flowing, to get it around sort of like a beltway around the city and county. So that's the main concern towards that. So I don't know if we want to say something else in here. One suggestion I think the developer needs to do, which is basically Riverside, is James City County is also doing their comp plan update right now. So I think they need to go talk to James City County and get them on board also.
So Carolyn, I like the way you wrote it. I think the EDA wanted something a little more, I don't mean encouraging, because I don't think we want to encourage it, but I don't think we want to, we're not trying to evaluate the pros and cons, but I think we were talking about, evaluating the developer's request for, or something like that. Maybe I'm just throwing this out. We could, recommend, evaluating the developer's request. Because I mean, that means traffic studies and all of that collaboration is kind of the way I was reading the EDA. That's kind of what they wanted. But that's just the way I read that.
Yeah, and so I mean, I tried to bring this back to as much of an empty slate as you can, given that fact that we're looking at a parcel that was rezoned 10 years ago and has been being built on for this period of time. But if there had been an additional entrance there, and it's all in James City County and VDOT, but then when it got to the city line, we would have carved out another green space, and we would have brought back the developable line to provide green space because it's an artery and all these other kinds of things. And the president of Doctors Hospital is on EDA. And so, she's part of the Riverside broadly writ, and even in a public meeting, but not a televised public forum, even in a work session between the two groups. I mean, I tried to tease out, like, are they real? Do they recognize what this really means? Obviously, you can't get any kind of negotiation on something like this here, but I mean, if we were to not necessarily advocate, which is, James's comment, I mean, like EDA, I think, was wanting us to be a little bit stronger, and I don't think any of us feel that's potentially our place, or that was such little investigation we could actually advocate as strongly as we're advocating for some other things. It puts for me, it puts that orangey splotch down there where that entrance would be back on the table for reevaluation by a future collection of people like us. And I guess, so for me, Carolyn, having said that as a preamble, are those things automatically on the table again, or is this line of development at this point inviolate, even if something like this were to change?
I mean, I think they have to look and do a traffic study and go to the county to look at this entrance, and then we still have the buffer area that they have to maintain. But when you create a new driveway or entrance into it, they've got to cut into that buffer area for a certain area. And of course, that would need approval from, like you said, from not only the city for the portion once you cross over the VDOT line into the city, but also from James City County and VDOT. And I mean, I think the initial development had a traffic study. The traffic study said what's been built is adequate to serve the development.
Yeah.
And until they provide something differently, or come up with a design, or come up with, something to talk about, we almost have to say something generic.
Yeah.
I wasn't here for that discussion, but is any of 199 in that area city controlled?
No.
Then
It's
I don't
all
understand why
James
this
City
would be
County
in there at all
VDOT.
anyway.
Yes.
Because it seems to me that's a James City County issue.
Was
Well,
my,
I presume the EDA is simply looking for a sort of a friendly word from
Right.
us to say that this would support the planning commission. The planning commission supports the EDA's interest or something. I haven't dug deeply into this. I can see why the developer would want a separate access. So they're looking at the map. I don't quite see what it gets them. I mean, there's only, I don't know, what is that, 400 yards? I mean, there's just not a lot of space, right, along 199 before
Yeah.
you.
So for me, one of the comments that I said at that joint meeting was, I felt it was a rather, I don't know, disingenuous ask in some ways, in that if you think about Newtown, there's only so many entrances to Newtown, and the supermajority of businesses, you have to go in one of these sort of 2-3 entrances that come to mind, and go in a quarter of a mile or a half a mile to where the place is that you're going. They were saying that some of the businesses that were thinking about locating in those orange squares that were employers of 100 people or something like that wanted this direct access for their employees, and left the negotiating table because they couldn't provide that. The idea that you'd have to go in by Harris Teeter and go over a half a mile, or go in the other direction, go over a mile, was a deal breaker. Which I mean, yeah, I'm like, okay, well, in the old days, I used to go to the movies, and guess what? I had to drive into Newtown. I still went to the movies.
All right, but that is a very real issue. I mean, the best example is Williamsburg Crossing Shopping Center.
Well,
You
sure.
know, that play, you know, for a variety of reasons, there's only that entrance that you have to get off onto off 199 onto Route 5 and then loop your way around, and that does affect, you know, the viability and the attractability of those parcels for certain businesses that require a lot of traffic count. You know, the more traffic you have going through there is going to increase the value of the property. I just don't see how this is, I mean, we can encourage it, but that without any context of that prior conversation, and people going forward are not going to have the context of that conversation, that
Right.
red print in there just seems out of place for a comprehensive plan.
Yeah, I think, Carolyn, I thought what you'd written was appropriately non-committal. But actually, given Mr. Tarley's comments, I mean, maybe since the whole purpose of this is to kind of help manage our relationship with another one of the city boards, given that it won't affect much of anything, I suppose we could express some mild support for the idea, although everything that basically everybody has said up to this point is, this seems like a lot to ask for a very small payoff for a very small number of people, and therefore maybe not something that the Planning Commission should endorse. When I first read this, I thought it sounded fine. I had a couple editorial comments just to tighten up the language, but
So to me, this is a 2-part item. One is the additional 4 lines there, but then that creates a new bullet point at the end of the chapter. That's one of the recommendations.
Right.
well, and that's right. And you, I mean, this is what Mr. Boswell was asking for essentially, I think, which was investigate increased connectivity. So you've been a little bit more supportive just by saying we need to do some research.
Well, and that's the part that I after the meeting with EDA, I think none of us, my sense was we don't want to endorse it, but at the same time we don't want to throw up a roadblock, an additional roadblock to the ones that already are there, because there are huge roadblocks, as Carolyn was saying, as Elaine was saying. The big ones being James City County and VDOT, and then the existing, the buffer and all. I mean, those are all barriers that already exist. And this whole conversation that we're having would have to be in, very granular detail if they really came forward and made a formal proposal to do this. If they had, somebody coming in and said, we want to put a corporate headquarters here, and here's what they want, here's what they need, and here's a formal proposal, because I think that's what they're looking at, and possibly down the road. So all of this investigation, because if we say investigate it, that means really going through all of these very complicated and probably, I think, unlikely scenarios to get something like that approved. So I would not feel comfortable endorsing it, because there's so many, as I said in that meeting, there's so many moving parts here. I don't have a clue about whether it would be a good idea or not, and I don't feel comfortable endorsing it. But I see nothing wrong with, if they want a traffic study, if they want to pay for a traffic study, if they want, if they want to make a formal request, I don't think it's necessarily something that we want to oppose either, right?
So maybe, how about instead of that that couple of sentences, I put in, investigate increased connectivity into quarter path at Williamsburg from Route 199 with James City County and VDOT for commercial development opportunities, and just sort of rephrase that and put it up in the page that I put the other paragraph.
Investigate seems to me to put a requirement upon us. And I kind of like more a term like cooperate as necessary with requests to, increase connectivity. I don't think we are owed any affirmative duty to investigate.
I think that's a nice way to put it.
Yeah,
Cooperate sounds, and would be, it would be what we would do, is we would be positive and helpful partners in solving this problem, but it doesn't make any commitment about what we would conclude at the end of that process. I think that's great.
That works for Greg.
So use cooperate instead of investigate?
Cooperate as necessary with James City County and VDOT with respect to any request
To explore, yeah.
to explore any additional entrance from 199.
Yeah, that piece about responding to a request, I think, rather than us taking any initiative, if there is a request, we cooperate.
Yeah, and so the other piece of this, Carolyn, was, I guess, the whole issue of James City County. I mean, this isn't part of our draft here, but I mean, is there some issue that we should go back to EDA or the Riverside folks and say, this isn't something for us to do, but you need to touch base with James City County because they're currently doing their comp plan too. I mean, just to be good friends.
Yeah, I'm meeting with Riverside folks next Thursday on another section of their development. So based on this discussion, one thing I was definitely going to tell them is that James City County is in their comp plan update, and have they approach James City County about an additional entrance. Okay. Because I think it's really important for them to get it into the county's plan if they have hopes of even doing this.
Sure. Okay.
So I will reword that, and if you guys are okay, I will just send you the text for that, and you can tell me if you like it or tweak it or whatever for both of those, and that will take care of, I think, the Route 199 entrance. And the only other thing I had on here was on page 826 for Chapter 8 was to continue to work with James City County and York County to increase development in the Edge District. I think that was a recommendation that came out of our joint meeting also.
Sure.
So other than that, that's all the comments I had on Chapter 8. So if there are any specific things the commission would like to talk about in other sections, we can do that. One thing I am going to try to do, and I thank you, Justin, for suggesting that, is maybe some of these maps, the big maps like map 8.6 and some of the other ones that we have in the plan, I'm going to see if we can't do a link to the map. And then maybe when we post them on the web, is to post the full JPEG or PDF. And that way, if you wanted to look at a bigger, scan it and make it larger, I think it might be a little bit easier to read. So I'll try to do that for some of the big maps that, like the existing land use maps, all of those ones that we had in this chapter. I'm going to try to do that and see if that'll help with being able to scroll in and see it better, and it doesn't get blurry on you when you start going in, increasing the resolution.
Oh, that'd be great. I mean, not to make it your new life's work, but I mean, for some of them, because these things can become much larger than you think they're going to be. But just looking at like 8.5 or 8.6, or 8.6 is specific on my own screen, another screen, there's a legend with maybe 3 dozen items over there, and it's just really difficult to see what the legend is.
Right.
All the different things the legend is showing us. That'd be great.
Yeah. So
it-
then it'll be in the plan so that you can see it's in there, and then there will be a link to it. And what we'll probably do is once the plan gets adopted, each chapter on the web, we sort of show each chapter, and on the planning comp plan, we can post the actual individual maps on there too, so that if someone wants to just print that map, they could just print it and not have to go in there and sort of print the page and then cut it out and do those other things. So we'll work on that and see if we can get that a little bit better, because it all depends too on the resolution you're using. Because I was doing one of them and I had Heather checking them, and she goes, "It looks blurry to me," and I said, "It doesn't look blurry to me." But it was because she was on a different resolution. So I think that makes a big difference also.
Thanks for doing that.
Great.
That's great.
So last call for chapter 8. Okay, there's nobody else on the call for us, so I'm not going to open up open forum and any of that kind of stuff. So chapter 9.
Chapter 9 was basically on page 9-11. I added, I'm getting to it, the lot adjacent to WADA that we went and changed the comp plan designation and the zoning.
Mm-hmm.
The Colonial Williamsburg Foundation sold that parcel to the American Battlefield Trust recently. So I figured since they don't own it anymore, we need to change the comp plan designation and rezone it. So staff is recommending that parcel at 7219 go from Colonial Williamsburg support to conservation areas, and that's what we typically have put those parcels in, and to rezone the property from MS to single family dwelling district RS1 to match other zoning classifications for conservation and sensitive environmental areas in the city. And then I added a section, as we all know, we're hearing about the possibility of the visitor center being redeveloped. So I figured it would be good to put something in the plan that addresses that. And I did it sort of generically because we don't really know what it's going to be right now. So I added a section in there to say the foundation is investigating the redevelopment of the visitor center into a mixed-use development, which has the potential to contain sports facilities, arts facilities, offices, etc., and other mixed uses to encourage additional visitation to the area. And staff would recommend that we change the comprehensive plan designation to economic development, because I think would be a good classification for it in the comp plan. And staff recommends rezoning the property to economic development when an acceptable master plan is submitted and approved by the city. So basically, we would change the comp plan designation is what I'm proposing, but we will not change the zoning classification until a master plan is submitted and approved. So those were the two things I added in chapter 9 on page 11. And for the recommendations I added those two sections in there. So that was basically the only changes I had in chapter 9.
Those got my attention. The visitor center one certainly got my attention. And I very much like deferring, changing the official zoning classification to ED until there's a proposal. I'm remembering over the last, I think, 7 years, a number of proposals that have come forward for visitor center property and other property around there. And I think we're 0 for 4 on those actually taking place. So I think we should be cautious in terms of changing that designation. The comp plan designation, could you just talk us through a little bit what your thinking is there about sort of getting ahead of things? I mean, I know that's not the zoning classification, but when there's a mismatch between those things, it starts to look like we're not doing what we want to do. And so could you just tell us a little bit about the benefit of actually changing the comp plan designation before there's something that we feel like we can endorse?
Right. The change in the comp plan designation really helps when you're trying to get developers and people who want to go in and start doing a project, if the comp plan is against it, usually they're not as keen to jump on board. So, I mean, I think if the commission doesn't want to change the comp plan designation, we could reword it a little bit and say the same thing for the comp plan designation as I did for the zoning classification. At least shows that we're okay with looking at something for redevelopment of the whole visitor center area.
Yeah, I would love to signal that. I would love to signal that we're open to suggestions. My concern with changing it to an ED designation is it seems like it really opens the door pretty widely, where currently that's some pretty nicely protected property that has been preserved for a long time, and the views along the two access corridors have been protected for a long time. And I'd be worried about changing that character, not just a little bit, but completely and irrevocably with a project, well, like we're seeing at Quarter Path right now. Something on that scale would be transformative, and maybe not entirely positively transformative, and I think would lead to difficult decisions about what visitors see as they come in on those corridors from 64. So it just I want us to be open-minded, but also cautious, I guess is what I'm saying here. It's one thing on 199, it seems to me. It's another thing here where these routes into the city have been so carefully tended to for 90 years now. To open the door to that changing really drastically, I guess my initial instincts are to be reluctant to quite sign up for that level of change.
How about if I say something similar to, I don't know if the other commission members to recommend a comp plan based on a mixed-use development proposal for this parcel, a recommendation to economic development, and the economic development zoning classification may be acceptable when an acceptable master plan is submitted and approved by the city, sort of combine them into one project. I think it's important for us to say, if we think redevelopment of the area is okay, that we mention it in the comp plan, because I think it makes it easier rather than saying, well, the comp plan says it's got to stay museum support, and as museum support, this use may not be allowed in that so I think it's important for us to say something in here is to move it forward to something that's different. But I think, like I put in here, I think it's really important for us to approve a master plan for it, that it's not done lot by lot, piece by piece.
Yeah. Right. So for me, I was seeing, well, first, Jeff, I totally appreciate your comments. And I think sometimes we're like adding code words that maybe only we understand. And then, but, I think it's important that we signal support to see proposals here, just as we are signaling to the South Henry potential development down there across from the Oaks that we're not supportive of a rezoning, and we're supportive of maintaining the zoning that's there, and if anything, the city buying some more of the property that's there if pieces became available. But it seems like the best way to support that area staying as a quasi-pristine entrance into the city is to not allow it to be rezoned into something of higher use. So to me, I see these things as bookends. I mean, they're totally different sides of the signaling here, but I think having some sort of a signal here is helpful, that we're not going to say it has to stay museum support, because then it's going to be a vacant lot that hopefully
Right.
every 100 years becomes a place that we go and get shots at.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, I think it's exactly that. It's so similar to the Wada property, in that it doesn't make any sense for that to be museum support. And I think we're now at the point where the foundation is signaling that it doesn't make any sense for that to be museum support. But I think what it becomes, I'd like to see some proposals before I endorse development of such a. Well, until a couple of years ago, we thought that Quarter Path was the last major piece of developable property in town. Now, all at once, this could become that piece, and that's huge. And that, it strikes me as something that we need to proceed. It seems to me we need to proceed very carefully. I guess that's all. But I do think we should signal that openness. I agree totally with that.
Is it a subtle but effective enough signaling to just reword that second sentence to say staff recommends changing the comprehensive plan designation upon submission and approval of an acceptable master plan?
That, John, I was just looking at that myself. I was like, the clause that begins to economic development until the when, that,
Right.
line and
Well,
a half there seems like the striking of that, and then people can wordsmith what's around it. But that I think potentially covers some of your concerns. That we're not recommending an economic development designation. We're recommending that we're recommending changing the designation when an acceptable master plan is submitted and approved.
And the staff would come out anyway, because this is a commission document. I only put staff in there because I wanted to have this discussion.
Well, is it too cowardly simply to say recommends changing the designation from museum support? In other words, we know it's not going to be that anymore.
Right.
We need to figure out what it needs to change to, and leave it at that.
I wonder if we can get away with just saying we understand the designation is likely to change, as opposed to going forward with something as strong as recommends a change. But we understand that it is likely to change and evolve as the appropriate planning comes in. This really worries me, because I would hate to see it become a little office complex or something.
Timeshares.
Yeah, even the notion of little townhouses or something just scares the bejeebers out of me. I mean, something that is significant, that will truly benefit our community, not that housing doesn't, but, not directly museum support in the manner that we see it, but years ago, a conference center was talked about there, maybe a sports facility. The notion of little mixed use restaurants and little things, that just, it gives me great anxiety.
So is that where the master plan piece comes about? Because
Yes.
I have a concern that if we recognize it's going to be, rezoned, there are many lots inside there that people would say, well, it says in the comp plan you can rezone this, and I only want this 5-acre parcel here. And, I don't see, you want to have 20 different lots that are just a mishmash of stuff.
Well, from a staff standpoint, I wouldn't want to see residential there unless it was a mixed use type residential development, a true mixed use residential development. And that's why that first sentence was sort of important, to say to encourage additional visitation to the area. That sort of says, it's a mixture of, we all think there's a possibility of sports complex going there. Council's been stressing that, and they've done studies and those kinds of things. But I don't think we would want that to turn completely to a residential neighborhood, just plain old, sell lots and put houses on it, or townhouses on it.
I agree. And with Colonial Williamsburg being, I believe that they're focused on cash and the best way to achieve some cash. The best way to achieve cash is to sell it off in little lots or one big lot to a developer who will sell it in little lots. So that the encouraging additional visitation, I think, is a great phrase to have in there.
Yeah, I agree. I think I agree with Carolyn, I guess. I think the first sentence is important, and I like that it includes sports facilities. I can't speak for all of us, but I can at least speak for myself and say I would hate to see it just be a giant sports complex. I think there's the potential for it to be a lot more than that. But I also agree with Jeff's point about wanting to ensure we protect the corridor and respect the sort of geography of the lot too, and what we value in it today as a feature. And I think that is where the master plan idea comes in. I certainly don't think we should recommend rezoning without that master plan, but I agree that maybe we should also be cautious about changing the comp plan designation. I don't know. I was open to it originally and still am recommending that change up front, knowing that museum support doesn't make sense. But I don't know. I think this discussion has given me a little more pause on that. So I'd be open to a sort of more conservative, tighter language as well. But certainly want to see master plan included, acceptable master plan included in whatever we say.
Yeah, what I had put in rewording that was submission and approval of an acceptable master plan in my little draft that I did myself.
Yeah,
whatever comes before that, it's up to the.
Okay,
So I
Caroline,
can word
enough-
that possibly,
yeah,
and
enough notes on that one to go
yeah.
forward? Okay.
John, can you send me your rewording? And then I'll tweak it and send it back out to everybody. You'll see it again next
Sure,
week.
sure.
So other than that, I didn't have any more changes in this section other than we'll also need to fix the recommendations based on the wording changes to this section. And I'm assuming everybody's okay with the American battlefield.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So unless anybody has anything else for that, I'll move on to chapter 10.
10, yep.
Chapter 10 was basically on 10-4, we updated the school enrollment. And on 10-8, we also added some language for the library. We got some updated figures for them for 2021. The downtown location anticipates over 147,000 visits, blah, blah, blah. These projections are based on the actual door count. So we added that in there to give you an update. Other than that, it's basically the same section we saw previously. Any additional comments or suggestions in chapter 10?
So just, I mean, as a silly aside, the door count now at the public library includes a temperature check.
Yep.
So that's how they have their door count currently, I guess.
So hearing none, I guess we'll go ahead with that one.
And yep, 11.
So then we're in chapter 11, and the only thing I changed in 11 was the recommendation on 11-14. I added the African American Heritage Trail, which is a council goal. Pursue an African American heritage trail that features prominent locations and monuments to Williamsburg past, including the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. I added that to the recommendations.
So Carolyn, just on that, I mean, most of our recommendations are reflected by something internal to the chapter. Does that, and I couldn't see that reflected back to any of the previous sections.
Yeah, I was having a hard time trying to figure out where to put it in there. Does anybody have any suggestions? I mean,
And maybe but I guess the flip side of not having it in one of the other sections is that then leave it open as to where it could be.
Right.
Right? Because
Right.
we're not saying it's going to be in this park or something like that. It's just.
Well, it could be under goal 1, add new amenities. Because it's, you know, of course, it's not tied to any existing parks necessarily.
Right.
I
You
would
want me
agree with that as well. I think goal 1 would be a good spot for it
Okay.
to go.
I can do that. Just add a little language there to support the recommendation. Okay. Anything else in that chapter?
Chapter 12.
Chapter 12, transportation. On 12:11, I added investigate realigning Traburn Drive to align with Compton Drive and relocate the traffic light to improve access into William and Mary and the Dillard complex. So that I talked with the city engineer, and that's something we may do in the future, and we would need it in the comp plan to be able to apply for grants and funding for it. So I added that on 12:11 along with a map. I also added at Route 132 and 132Y, investigate and design intersection improvements to that visitor center drive, Route 132. And the reason with that is if any development gets done in the visitor center, and even now, the thinking is we might want to do a roundabout, we might want to do, you know, an intersection traffic light improvement there in the future, and having it in the comp plan gives us, again, options for grants and funding, federal funding and state funding opportunities. So I added that map. And then I went down to 12:18, the sidewalk map needs to be updated to include Jamestown Road. Thank you, Justin. That is not highlighted on one side with a sidewalk. So GIS is updating that. So I will insert that when I get it. On 12:19, I highlighted the Governor Berkeley Road between Richmond Road and Long Hill Road for new sidewalks. And the reason I highlighted that is because the Public Works Director told me the neighborhood does not want sidewalks on Governor Berkeley Road between Richmond Road and Long Hill Road. So I didn't know if we wanted to keep that in there. It probably doesn't hurt, but we might get comments on it, I guess, when we go with the final draft. And then I noticed we didn't have the new sidewalk along South Henry Street from the Oak to College Landing Park, so I added that to this page. And then I went down to page 21 and just let you know that this service was discontinued in April, the Route 13 to Surrey County for WADA. And it was basically discontinued because it was a route that didn't have any ridership. So it was a demonstration route, and the demonstration didn't produce enough ridership for WADA to continue that.
Can you scroll back up to the one about the Oaks? I don't have it pulled up on my screen. I thought the second bullet already says, doesn't it say that? Isn't that the same thing? A new sidewalk on South Henry Street to connect the Oaks on Henry.
Yep.
So we did have it. It's been in there. It's been in there since the 80s, right. I think. So it is. Yeah.
Yep. The reason I probably stuck it in there, I was trying to put the stuff in the implementation chapter and couldn't find it, and I go, well, I got to make sure this one's in here.
I think the people in the Oaks will be happy to have it twice, but we don't.
Yep.
We don't really.
So
okay, good catch on that one, James. On the Governor Berkeley Road piece, so I mean, obviously there's sidewalks on Richmond Road. There are sidewalks on Long Hill Road,
right
on one side there, not both. And so this seemed like a natural, I guess, for us. This road also has had those speed bump calming devices put in since, I guess, the last comp plan probably, or a few years ago. I can't imagine that we all just invented this need for a sidewalk. So is it that we heard from some members of that community a while ago, and now new members of that community are speaking up and saying they don't want it, or?
That's correct. I think
What
it's
is-
important to have the sidewalk connection, but that's why I highlighted it and wanted to have this discussion in case it came up so that we would all be in agreement as to the importance of that. And I think it is important to connect Richmond Road to Long Hill Road. And we actually have that multi-use path on Long Hill Road now.
Yeah.
This seems like a logical connection for that neighborhood. And if it's in the comp plan, if it's 3 years down the road and they decide they want to have it again, at least this gives us an opportunity to apply for grant money. Whereas if it's not in here, it becomes a lot harder for us to get any grant money to help supplement paying for the sidewalk construction.
What is their reason for not wanting it? I mean, I could think of their reasons potentially, but I'm curious what their actual reasons are.
I think they just don't want in the connection people coming through the neighborhood. It's the
Gotcha.
same thing now with if you notice, if you've been through that street lately, it's only residents anymore. And if you're not a resident, you can get a ticket. Even
Yeah,
to drive.
I'd like to see somebody enforce that one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Really?
I put my lawyer hat on.
That's
So I
astonishing.
think that's the reason why.
Yeah, but the flip side of that is that there's a lot of kids in that neighborhood, and older
Who
people,
might be able to walk to James Blair and
and older folks who might age out of driving, and they can walk to Aldi, and there's sidewalks, but there's not sidewalks right there. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm more comfortable with leaving it in, and if at some point in the future there seems to be some flush grant money, and that neighborhood wants to come up with some sort of a common voice, versus that we heard some neighbors and they encouraged us, and then other neighbors are saying no, let's have that public meeting.
yeah, I think that's right. I think it's easier to be responsive to a community that says, no, we don't want you to spend money on this, than it is to have to explain to a community why we couldn't do the thing that we said we were going to do 5 years ago because you asked us not to. I think it's much easier for us to be responsive and say, no, we won't do this, than it is to try to make it happen if we don't keep it in the plan. I'm not being very articulate, but I favor keeping it in.
Yeah, I think it gives us more flexibility.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And the only other change I added was on 1225. Of course, I had the Route 132 and Compton Drive, but I also added adopting the regional bikeways map as recommended by HITBAC. HITBAC we updated that map, and it is on our website, and we will do a link to that as it says in the previous portion on this, but I added that as a recommendation.
Sure.
And the HITBAC bike map is basically where they think the important areas for biking in the city and improvements are, not only the city, but James City and York County. It's the 3 jurisdictions. And that map was recently updated, and we're basically in the city moving pretty far along with doing the recommendations that are on the map for us. So they're pretty happy with the city because we not only build bike lanes and multi-use paths, we actually maintain them. And that's an issue in the counties because VDOT technically is supposed to be maintaining them, and they get salt and sand and grass grows on them. So they're pretty happy with the city and our maintenance of our bike paths and bikeways.
Okay. I mean, that seems reasonable to me. Nope.
And that's it as far as my recommendations on the changes for Chapter 12.
Carolyn, a couple things. One, the Compton Drive and Trayburn, I like that idea. What does that do, though, to the entrance into to School of Ed?
It will make that not a traffic light entrance. This was looked at previously, and it was I believe William and Mary, who didn't want it at that time, but now with the relocation of coming in on Compton Drive from Route 199 and from the interstate as one of their main entrances into campus, this has become important because, as you know, if you come out of Compton Drive and try to go left or right at certain times of the day, it's most difficult. And this is probably a long shot that it may not get done, probably, in all honesty, in the next 5 years. But if we ever wanted to apply for approval and get grant money to help pay for it, it needs to be in our comp plan.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, along with, you know, changing the speed limits on Monticello. But the second thing is, as it relates to 2nd Street, you know, I know that's York County, as we pass by Parkway Drive and down that way, and that's one of our entrance corridors that would be nice if York County would cooperate with us to improve their side of the thing. Is that something that's worth mentioning, that we would try to, you know, I don't know how that works, but you know, it's just an eyesore, and that's, like, you know, one of our, and it's, you know, pedestrian, no sidewalk. The sidewalk ends over by Merchant Tire or whatever it is now. I don't know. Is that something that's worth mentioning?
It's similar to the Route 199 entrance into Quarter Path. We can make a recommendation, but it's
Okay.
See, I'm trying to go to 2nd Street on here and see what we've got written.
But part of the whole edge district piece
Right.
is developing sidewalks that go in between, and part of that discussion that we had with the EDA and the edge, well, I think this might have been just me at an EDA meeting with an edge district consultant or whatever, is, you know, sidewalks and that connectivity. Because, so for Rob Willie, who is a city of Williamsburg, but his business is in the county there, there's not a crosswalk from one side of the street to the other for like a half a mile. So, you know, there's the ability to move amongst all these different restaurants and things like that, the brewery, whatever that's there, doesn't exist once you get out of the city area. So I guess, Carolyn, are there other places in the comp plan that edge district support that's multi-jurisdictional and multimodal transportation? I mean, it's lots of different things together. Are there other places where you need to have that support?
Yeah, I put a note down here. There's got to be somewhere I can find encourage pedestrian and bicycle improvements, or, you know, for connections on 2nd Street and Merrimack Trail, and I'll figure out some wording and find a place to put something in there. How's that?
I think that's important to you know, the businesses that are on that side,
Right.
and the attractiveness of that entrance corridor. No one knows that you're going from James City County to York County to the city of Williamsburg in the course of the 3/4 of a mile.
Okay. Yeah, I wrote something down. I'll find somewhere to
Thank you.
put it in there. So that's all I had in the basically transportation section.
So on to infrastructure.
Yep, infrastructure, basically I didn't change anything in that chapter. It's all pretty much the same, giving you a final look at it. If there's any comments or anything you see in there that needs additional we left out, or it's pretty straightforward, I think. So not hearing any on that. Chapter 14 is the environmental management, and that's pretty much the same. The only thing I added was I did add a sea level rise paragraph at the end because I think there's a requirement in the state that we talk about sea level rise, and Williamsburg is fortunate enough that sea level rise doesn't affect us like it does for a lot of our adjacent jurisdictions and folks on the south side and the peninsula. So I wrote this section and ran it by our engineer, and that's a really cool map over there. And as Justin said, it's kind of hard to read when you go and look at it, but this would be another example of one that we could put a link to, and you could really dive into seeing the sea level rise. So basically for us, we've got Queens Creek, College Creek, Tutter's Neck Creek below the dam, and Paper Mill Creek below the dam are our tidal water bodies in the city. The act, as we all know, the Chesapeake Act limits development adjacent to our water bodies. There are no habitable structures within the city located in a floodplain, and modeling of predicted sea level rises indicate impacts would be limited to infrastructure in College Landing Park and possibly a few lots in Port Inn. And when we say a few lots in Port Inn, it's basically part of their lots, and we don't think any of their structures are in the sea level rise area. And so the engineer also said he's thought that additional modeling reflects no significant effects on transportation systems or utility infrastructure within the city outside of those mentioned and above. So I added that as an additional category in this chapter 14, environmental management. So other than that, the chapter is basically the same.
Any items for here, this chapter?
Alrighty, and then chapter 15 was trying to take everything in the other 14 chapters and put them in one chapter, which was not easy. So I'm sure you have comments. I probably left out something in here that's important, but I tried to go through all the other 14 chapters and put the recommendations somewhere into these areas. And basically I broke them down into similar to what we have now in the implementation chapter. Implementation in generic, talking about zoning changes, architecture review board, neighborhoods, economic development, interjurisdictional cooperation. That's probably a good spot here to add your comment to Mr. Tarley on the encouraging pedestrian improvements in the adjacent areas. So I could probably even add it here too. Capital improvement program, and then the transportation sections like streets, bikeways, and sidewalks, streetscape, stormwater, public buildings, parks and open space, and finally utilities. So I tried to take all the recommendations we had in the previous chapters and put them in this one of these categories. So
I had a couple.
It was a lot because it was not easy to
No doubt.
move over.
I had a couple of questions, more than additions or deletions. First is very minor, just on the first page where it mentions mini storage. I assume remove mini storage means remove mini storage as an allowed use rather than remove mini storage facilities.
Yep, I can put it as an allowed use. Good.
Yeah, I think just something to clarify that. The next was also kind of about just clarifying things in the section on architectural review on 15.1 and 15.2. Near the end, you say the design review guidelines are under review, and I think probably and will be updated as part of the comprehensive plan implementation process. But then the next two sentences, I wasn't sure who is being addressed there. You say, consider the downtown vibrancy plan recommendations to the review guidelines and consider the arts and cultural district's unique nature. And I think that probably just needs to be reworded so it says the architectural review board or this process will take into consideration the vibrancy plan recommendations and the arts and culture district's unique nature. it's just as a, you know, depending upon who's reading this, it's not necessarily sure what the Planning Commission specifically would do with these directives.
Okay.
Let me mention one other ARB thing too. We were discussing yesterday the issue of affordable housing, and as we go through the materials, you know, looking at updating the approved materials in particular, there's conversation about that, and I think that if you know, we're looking at affordable housing in the plan in a lot of ways, and so there might be something that that we could say here that would support the ARB, because they're kind of mixed about how the ARB would assess or account for affordable housing in that context. And so if we had something here that would sort of encourage that and mentioned affordable housing, just very generally, that might be useful. Like I said, this just came up yesterday at our meeting.
I think the one thing too, I don't know that I disagree or agree. I think it might be worth including here. I'll only offer that, you know, since we've had guidelines, affordable housing has been not explicitly but implicitly considered, and one of the ways in which that happens is through devising those districts. And so if you look carefully at where the districts are and where they aren't, there are a number of neighborhoods that simply aren't, the ARB doesn't have purview over, and there's a not an exact correlation, but there is a kind of overlap between where there's affordable housing in town and where the ARB has purview. It's not one-to-one. Clearly, there's some affordable neighborhoods where the ARB still has some say, but they tend to be AP3 districts, right, where the lowest level of oversight is applied.
Yep, the AP3 district, we had the assessor look at single-family dwellings in AP1, 2, and 3. In AP3, as you mentioned, Jeff, was the one that was most affordable. It was just over 200,000, I think, whereas AP1 and 2 were over 450, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and those are the ones that are closest to the center of town, so for the most part.
And I think it all depends on what your definition of affordable ends up being too, because that's what part of the affordable housing work group is working on. One of the things probably is, what is affordable?
Yeah.
There's affordable in a certain range, you know, the low to moderate, and then there's the median, and then, so what are we looking for when we say we want to do affordable housing? Is it workforce housing?
Yeah,
Is
we had that conversation, and what I you know, the sense of it that I get is that there's this was, you know, there was a reference, I think, in a letter in the Virginia Gazette, which of course is not that we should not take any of that too seriously, but there's a perception that that the city exists, you know, that these regulations, the guidelines exist to cost people money and to make them jump through hoops and that sort of thing. So affordability, you know, is not just workforce housing, you know, in that context. It's like, you know, young families with a house in one of those neighborhoods, whatever the cost is, that the very expensive materials, you know, are an impediment to improvements and that sort of thing. So that's the sense, and ARB is just sort of kind of starting to look at that. And, you know, how that's defined, but any kind of guidance from Planning Commission would be helpful on that. Whether and this seems like it might be a good place to just, you know, just to mention it.
I agree.
And I did have the conversation also separately with a city council member a couple of weeks ago in a parking lot. Who has some comments about siding that can only be special ordered from one place in Richmond, you know, that kind of thing.
That's a little frustrating, quite honestly.
Yeah, yeah. So it's things like that. So affordability, of materials to keep the houses in proper repair and that sort of thing. And that's for a rental house, but it's in 2, I think.
Yeah, James, you're going to get me wound up about siding. Repainting it is clearly more affordable than replacing it with hardy plank. So I think the great thing about the guidelines is they do allow for flexibility, and so on a case-by-case basis, if there's a strong case for wholesale replacement of wood siding or an addition with a material that's not explicitly approved, the ARB does have that flexibility. So that's something I always appreciated, is you could really listen to somebody. But there's an argument out there that gets trotted out periodically, and at its most absurd, you hear things like, well, Thomas Jefferson would have loved vinyl siding because he loved technology. And I think that's true. And the truth is he would have used it on his slave quarters. He wouldn't have used it on Monticello. So, some of these debates get rehearsed, I guess, every 7 years.
Yeah, they're kind of silly. Well, it came up separately too in the Holly Hills townhouses. They ran into some extra engineering costs with for the retaining wall and that sort of thing they had to do. So they came back with a request to use kind of a particle board siding and vinyl windows. And the justification for it was affordability.
Yeah.
So, to make these properties more affordable, so.
Yeah.
So that, it's a lot of moving parts in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought it might be something, that we might want to consider. So there's some uniformity, maybe just signaling that taking that into account, because if that's not part of the conversation in the design review guidelines, because the conversation about the siding was that, well, it's wood and glue, but it says it must be wood, and therefore it's partly wood. So, it gets, how that we've been on, anybody who's been on ARB, how that goes.
Mm-hmm.
So I bring it up and leave it at that.
So is there a change to the page that we're looking at that you're proposing, or?
I would, just add a sentence, because we say consider, and I like I said, it was just yesterday's meeting, so I don't have any specific language, but I think,
Well, then from a different perspective, Carolyn, you've heard this conversation. Is something that maybe you can take and come back with? I think that we're talking about just a couple of words probably in that paragraph.
Yeah, just adding affordability somewhere in there in an appropriate place. And Carolyn, I can look at that and send you something too.
Yeah, if you could look at it and send me something, that would help.
Yeah, like I say, it's just kind of processing in my mind right now.
Yeah, no problem.
Yesterday's meeting.
Good.
Yeah, and candidly, I mean, like you said, Carolyn, this was a lot of work trying to pull this all together, and now understanding what the purpose of this section is. I would like a further opportunity to just sort of review, make sure we got everything.
Yeah. What I would suggest is take a good look at it. And if you have any changes, email them to me. And if you could email them to me, by the end of next week, not this week, but next week, and copy everybody else so that everybody else sees that any change you made. And if anybody has heartburn, respond and say, we need to just talk about this further. That would help a whole lot. I guess after today, my intentions are I'm going to pull all of these changes together, and in the May meeting, give you a full document. In giving you a full document, we'll see it on the web, but I also will give you a new book with pages so that you actually have a hard copy on what it will look like. And then that's basically our final If anybody has any change, that's it. And I was hoping we would go to a public hearing in June. So I would need to advertise it for a public hearing. So that's why it's important for us to tie down any major changes we want and get them advertised.
Okay, so just in terms of process of what you're saying there, so we have a May 19th hearing date.
Right.
My recollection from our, I guess, April 14th meeting, I don't remember having any public hearings scheduled. So is this what we're going to do on May 19th?
That's what I'm hoping to do is if any, public will see it. If anybody has any final heartburn with the whole document or any portion of the document, they can come and address the commission. And plus the commission, this will be your final look at what's written and how it looks, because then you can go from one chapter to another in the hard copy and
Right.
give staff the final let's go to a public hearing in June.
And so the May 19th would be,
The final draft, I would call it.
well, I mean, but it's not the public hearing on the comprehensive plan, but it would be a forum for public discussion or something. There's some other legal avenue for us for doing this so that people would recognize and seeing it advertised that this is actually a time for them to come and give us input, like with the CIP when in the old days when people would show up ahead of having our work session. That's what this is going to be, right?
Yeah, I think since we've been in COVID and haven't had real meetings, that it gives them an opportunity to come and address staff and the commission on what we've drafted over the last 3 years.
Yes. Yes. So then we should be thinking that we're going to be meeting in person on May 19th.
Yes.
And obviously, rules are being modified weekly, it seems like right now at different stages. But not everyone does feel comfortable meeting. So if you don't feel comfortable going back into our congregate setting in 3 weeks' time, we did change the rules before COVID that you could call in. So there is still that functionality. And obviously we'll still be spaced out. We're not all 7 of us are going to be at the front.
We will be spaced out. The chairs will be marked similar to what we had before.
It'll be like when we were doing things before.
Right. They'll have the temperature machine where you check your temperature when you come in. There will be a requirement you wear face coverings. So all of that will be in play. And on the topic of calling in for that meeting, I think it's fine. If it's okay with the commission, I want to add to your bylaws the recommendation that council adopted on electronic participation in meetings. So if it's okay with you all, I would like to put that on the agenda to adopt what council adopted, which is section 2-34 of the city code.
Yeah.
And I'll email you that the first of the week so that you can read it, which allows some electronic participation at our regular meetings for the, I think it's good for us to go ahead and add that to our bylaws. And I think ARB just recently did it, EDA did it.
EDA has done it, the Tourism Development Committee has done it. So I think it was on our agenda to do it a year plus ago, and then everything else happened in the world, but it isn't something that we're rushing to the game. We're actually one of the few boards or commissions, so we should do that. And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I will add that to the agenda then, and then it'll be basically that and the comp plan. And I did get an application in this week for the city lofts to take the rezoning application that they got approved for student dwellings.
Mm-hmm.
They are requesting to take the student dwellings off and just have it multifamily. So that will be on the agenda, but not for public hearing until June. So you'll see that as a future public hearing. Okay. Other than that, that's all I have for Planning Commission. The May meeting, we don't have any site plans that need to come to the commission.
And now that we are moving to seeing the comp plan at the Planning Commission hearing, that means we won't be having a work session in May.
That's correct.
Okay, so,
2, I think, is enough.
so if we're gonna be getting new hard copies at some point, do you want us
Yes.
to bring back these old
You can
binders?
just bring those to the meeting. We've bought new binders to match the color scheme, so you'll get new binders and you can bring those old ones in.
And as a good public employee myself, we like to recycle these kinds of things for the next event. So I'm sure you guys
Right.
can use them at some other time. Okay, cool.
Right.
So bring your thing that we got a month or so ago.
Yep.
Okay. Is there anything else that anyone needs to bring in front of us for the good of the group? Just looking at the agenda, we're made good time. It's only 5:15, 5:16. Okay, not seeing anything. Thank you everyone for coming and getting through all these chapters. Thank you, Carol, Aaron, Heather, for everything you're doing, and we will stand adjourned.
See you next month.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good to see everybody.
Bye.